Good evening. Welcome to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I'm so glad that you're here. You know, I was so wrong Wednesday when I said it was Sadie Hawkins Day. So if you ask somebody to marry you and they said no, I hope that you went back and got them. Just kidding. But, I get excited about things sometimes, and that was one of them because I like my marriage. I think everybody should try it at least once. Kidding. Hello, Lori Dorsey. I am really enthusiastic about tonight's show. I have been following him on Facebook for a little while, and the first time I saw him, somebody else was talking about him. And I thought, well, he sounds kind of interesting. So I went and looked at his Facebook profile, and I thought, well, okay, he is pretty interesting. He likes the same stuff I do. He does radio, or video. So he's got, I know he'll talk. So I went and asked, and he said yes. So I have Michael Rose here tonight. He is Dark Hour Paranormal. He is the founder and host, and he is also, what caught my eye also, Third Phase UFO. I think I got that right. So we'll find out if I did or not. Third eye or third phase. I think it's phase. We'll just ask him. Michael, hi. Thank you for coming on.
Well, hello, Kat. Thank you very much for having me on tonight.
Well, I'm just really thrilled.
I was involved with the channel called ThirdPhase UFO Report, which was a sister channel to Third Phase of Moon, just to clarify.
Okay, thank you. Well, because I hate getting things twisted, and I thought, I did not clarify that with him when we were talking before. Should probably have said something about that. So, but you're pretty matter of fact, and I didn't figure that you would run screaming from the show. Hopefully,
not yet.
Not yet. It's early. So, but I'm really because of fate, anything UFO catches my eye. I'm a paranormal investigator. I've done that since God was a child. But the UFO I've always been interested in because I've seen them. Hi, Linda. I've seen them, and the first time I ever saw one, I was going into sixth grade, and my dad had some friends over. They were paratroopers. They were Special Forces Green Beret 182nd Airborne Division, and they were all out cooking after a jump day. And I saw something in the sky that wasn't moving. It wasn't blinking. It wasn't doing anything. And I was like, Dad, what is that? And they all turned around and looked. And they all looked at each other and said, it's a helicopter. I said, no, it's not. I've been watching them all day. That's not a helicopter. And it was so funny because they were just kind of like, it is. That's a helicopter. Well, there were funky lights outside my sister's and my bedroom window that night that were not the right colors, right? So I just, I hid under the covers. I didn't know what it was. It freaked me out. And now I know. Because sixth grade, I didn't know what a UFO was. And so that's how I got interested in them. How did you get interested?
I've always dabbled in this field of esoterica as long as I can recall. I mean, big fan of Arthur C. Clarke, back in the 80s, going into the 90s. You had productions like Unsolved Mysteries and so forth. In those days, it was a little bit more difficult to find certain information, even on specific cases that we would consider infamous today. You had to catch one of those programs or check into your TV guide to see when something was playing. Otherwise, there really wasn't another way to go about this type of research. Yeah, sure, there were libraries that had some books, and I had some of those as well. But really, things only could take you so far. That was my first real interest in this field as a generality, being that young and having some of that research that I could get into, and obviously the affinity for those productions. But I was having paranormal experiences, which I wasn't really aware that that's what it was until some years after the fact. Something as simple as I was laying in bed one evening. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and my floor was the second level. and I happened to look out the window, and I saw something standing right at the window. It looked like a bear. It's the only way I could describe it. But this thing had to be floating in order to get up and sit by the window. And, of course, went downstairs and told my parents. They were, oh, it's just a bad dream, go back up to bed. But, some years later, I thought back to that certain retention that still sits with me now. And I look at it, it looks more like a Sasquatch face to me than a bear. But, even something as simple as that, I was having experiences, well off very young.
That's interesting, because that's the one thing that I have not had show up and, in my wheelhouse. And I am so sorry. Somebody in Washington, D.C. is trying to get in touch with me, and I don't know who that would be. So no, not during, I thought that was off. But when you said that you realized later, were you freaked out that there was a bear at your window at the time?
At the time, yes, I was frightened.
I mean, that would have been so disconcerting.
Yeah, as a 7-8-year-old child, with no real explanation. Yeah, it was definitely an experience that, again, I remember to this day.
Well, what did you do? Did you hide under the covers? Did you scream for help? Did you?
No, I just went and told my parents what I was seeing, and very matter-of-factly, I would say, looking back, I was looking for more of an explanation, but even more so that wasn't there watching me while I was trying to go to sleep. That was the most unsettling part.
Yes.
And there are people who have these type of experiences. Maybe it's not with a cryptid the way that I saw it. Perhaps it's with something extraterrestrial, something interdimensional, something that sits within that paranormal highway. They find it in their room at the edge of their bed, sitting on top of them in some cases. So, I mean, it's certainly not uncommon for people to have these type of experiences, but I find that when they occur at a younger age, they can be that much more impactful as you go forward.
Well, I would agree with that. They can actually alter a lot of areas of our lives. I do this. Yeah, you do what you do. And it's interesting because anytime that I speak with someone, whether it's at a conference or, a public investigation or on the show, I'll ask, what brought you into either, ufology or the paranormal? They're both paranormal. But what specifically, why are you doing this? Why are you interested? And almost everybody has an experience. Almost everybody is at a younger age. They were exposed to it. Something happened in their home. They saw a dead grandmother walking across or a dead soldier walking across the hallway. I mean, it really sticks with you when it starts, especially at a young age, because I got told that wasn't real. And
that's the go-to.
Yeah. And, when I had my first ghost experience, I was 5th or sixth grade. And there was somebody and I shared a room with my sister, and there was somebody between our beds, and nobody lived there except our parents. And so that was like, and at that time, all but one of my grandparents was still alive, and I didn't recognize who that was. So that was kind of like, okay. And as I got older and I started seeing people doing this, research and investigation and just sharing, I was like, wow, there's people that'll talk about that, like you.
Absolutely. I mean, today we're a little bit more disclosed in a sense where, talking about the paranormal world or UAPs, UFOs, USOs, anything that, sits in there, it's more of a household conversation. And, we can look towards the television shows on the paranormal that sprouted up during the late 90s going into the early 2000s, had a big influence on people's awareness. That's the biggest thing, especially in the world of ufology. We just didn't have a certain awareness from the common person or the layman, the way that most people should be interested in this. And, as far reaching as it goes, that type of technology, who's had it, who's utilizing it, where we got it from. I mean, these are questions that should be commonplace. But again, today we have more of an affordance to be able to talk this way with less ridicule, because you go into work and you tell your coworkers, oh, well, I saw a UFO last night and here's what it looked like. I don't know what it is. You're less prone to that ridicule than we were 20 years ago. I mean, your boss might say, oh, yeah, I saw the congressional hearings that they've been holding over the last handful of years. I'm familiar with this as a subject. So we do have that in our back pocket, and it is progressive in that sense. So thankfully, we are still working on that line.
Well, I have really been enjoying the interest that Congress has suddenly developed in this subject. Or I guess maybe the willingness to at least act like they're going to share information. My very favorite was Nancy Mace's face when she asked a question she didn't know the answer to, which was, do we have remains from these crashes? Yes. Are they human remains? No. I mean, just don't ask a question if you don't know the answer. That's a really good rule of thumb.
It's out there. I mean, you talk about Jaime Maussan and, the mummies that he's got. What have we seen? Only a handful of those rolled out. Well, there's upwards of, 25 left for people to see that they will eventually purportedly bring to the table. They won't let any scientists from America go in there and do the testing that's required. And I think that if we were allowed to do that, there would be a little bit more credence to what they are. But, we're still up in the air. I mean, yet this is some of the most provocative and controversial things from the subject itself that we have in front of us right now. I often say, especially in the paranormal world, would we know the smoking gun if we saw it now? Chances are we may not. We're very saturated in these fields, and there's a lot of contrivances that have gone into what might come across our desk in terms of a video or some sort of audio evidence. And people can do a lot of different things. And now you have the advent of AI in the mix. Things just become much more mired. But that being said, we still have to do our due diligence in this research. And that's why, thinking about this with a critical mind is so important. And yes, you'll have the anecdotal right brain sort of thing going on as well. That'll be perhaps your experience or somebody, close to you within your peripheral. But that being said, we should always be looking towards the explanation that we, at least in whatever capacity, have to give ourselves when we're talking about these different aspects of this field.
It's really interesting when you're talking about the anecdotal things. We have such an opportunity if people will step forward and take it, because I interviewed, I guess a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, Jacques Vallée. He had written a new book with his co-author called Trinity about the crash prior to Roswell. And it was definitely a bizarre thing for me to talk about. I wasn't aware of it. And yet there had been a man that was reaching out to me whose last name was the same as one of the children who saw that crash. And he would never tell me what his background was. I was going to have him on, and I started asking questions, and he started pulling back. And I'm like, I need to know. I mean, I can't just bring you on if I don't know what your history is, because again, I did not recognize that name. And when I was reading Jacques' book, I was like, I'll be darned. There's that guy. That must have been his dad or his grandpa that, interacted with the being that had survived the crash. There were, I think, 3 of them, and that they all ultimately died. But it was a few days before the military showed up. And they only came because their telegraph tower had gone down. They couldn't communicate, so they had to follow the line to find where something was broken, and they found a UFO. Crashed with 2 dead bodies and 1 dying. So, and the kids watched from a hilltop. The reason they saw it was because they had snuck out on horses. I mean, to go out and do a sneaky horseback ride at night. So, things like that I love that, because it's always somebody that's just in a random spot that, either they weren't supposed to be in or whatever. But, because those kids were out there on their horses and trying not to get in trouble, they watched the whole thing being very quiet to make sure nobody showed up. So,
there's a couple different things you could think about this. I mean, it does seem like randomly they're in the right place, the right time, wrong place, wrong time, however you want to look at it. And yet we do understand from people who have interacted with extraterrestrials purportedly, or have continued contact in certain ways, that there's a very stark nonlinearity that goes into some of the existence of these beings that they encounter. And they probably know far more than we do in an intuitive sense, and know how to utilize that. It's become part of their natural course to whatever degree, that body has the capability of doing so. It's been said in many different ways that, if you've seen a UFO, there's like a 90% chance that you've been abducted before. You just don't recall. Again, this idea is that a lot of us are being utilized in that way. And, this is something that's been going on for as long as anybody can remember. But, that being said, you bring up, certain names here and individuals that have had experiences so long ago. It's really important that we sit these folks down now to whatever degree they're willing to cooperate, because they're a dying breed. Calvin Parker, Travis Walton. I mean, these are famous cases that ufology will be talking about for the rest of time. I mean, it's the foundation of what we've had to work with since we've ever turned an eye to the sky this way. And keep in mind that these are all modern interpretations of what's going on. We see in ancient history and lots within petroglyphs, hieroglyphs, and so forth, that, there's a possibility that we had a relationship with certain extraterrestrial species, and it wasn't so uncommon or out of place that, we knew that there was life in the universe and that we had interactions and influence perhaps in both ways. So we're very much, at the end of the Yuga cycle, which lasts about 26,000 years in certain terms. And, thinking about it as a clock, if you see that 0 point up at 12, coming down to the 6 o'clock point, within the energy and transitions that happen in the earth physically and the life that's there's a consciousness that can be quantified to a certain degree within this phenomena. And the Yuga cycle pretty much illustrates, when civilization on that planet is more conscious and less conscious based on this cyclical movement. And we've just kind of crested that 6 o'clock. So if you were to think the Dark Ages, no written language, you know what I mean? People are speaking in tongues, poverty, tumult, you name it, that Dark Ages, that's the bottom of that cycle. So we're kind of swinging up towards the 7 o'clock point. And yes, we have quite a ways to go, but within this trajectory, we're headed up in consciousness, and more information like what we're talking about will be revealed.
Well, I am interested in, I'd really like to get to the Jetsons is where I'd like to get, but we'll work on that. But that's my dream. I want a flying car, and a maid that's a robot that doesn't have to get directions, and will just come and do stuff for free. All I have to do is, provide the oil and stuff.
We're on the cusp. We have flying cars already. They're just not available to you and I, but we have them. Russia's made them. I mean, there are a bunch of countries that have already done this, and AI is going to replace many of those mundane tasks that we do every day. So within the next 20 years, you might see a robot that gets you, your hot dog out of the water, whatever. You know what I mean?
Because I'm tired of burning my fingertips.
No, there you go.
But it really is so interesting to me, because to think that we're actually on the cusp of something is so fun, because we've just in our lifetime, well, I'm probably older than you, but just in my lifetime, there have been so many innovations and so many changes, and we put people on the moon, and we've brought people back, and we've had people that can come and go now. We send people off and bring them back, and reusable craft. Reusable craft, I think, is a big deal. And I think it was a game changer. Now, if we could just figure out how to make it go farther and longer and safer. I know they're working so hard on quantum. They're trying to get that time frame grooving. And I think probably there is. Are you familiar? I know you are. You've done this forever. Are you familiar with the 20+1? program?
Plus one sounds very familiar.
It's where, ostensibly, it is where the military utilizes people, sends them forward. And so they're
like
gone
a 20 and back sort of thing. Yeah.
20 and back. Yeah. And what do you think of that? Do you think that's a thing?
This is difficult because in starting to talk about this, you have to entertain the possibility of tangible timelines that are not the standard one that we're caught in 0.2. Going into my research and experience with the Montauk Project and other Black projects that did similar things, I do understand that this is very much a possibility and has been utilized in certain ways. But the technology and the methodology to achieve such a thing, number one, takes an enormous amount of power. And when you look into the Montauk Project as an example, we see that they did have certain power that they could have generated to possibly create something along those lines in terms of affect. But, in speaking to a lot of super soldiers that, claim to have been out, on multiple campaigns or, very specific details about life in battle and within military factions, I will always entertain those because I can't disprove it. I've had people come to me and say, I remember you from X mission, this and the other thing. I don't remember anything super soldier oriented. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. I just don't recall. And yet I'm readily able to pull up certain memories when it comes to Montauk. And I wasn't there the way that some of the participants or those that were forced to participate were. I was in a different faction of energy that, if you want to, we can go into that. But, long story short, it's up to you. Wherever you want to take it, we can go. But, to get back to your question there, I would have to say that there is validity until I can prove otherwise.
That's how I feel about that. So, have you actually spoken with any of the individuals that were part of the 20 and back?
Yes.
I have
too. Multiple individuals, yes.
And I felt like when I spoke with them, I felt that they were very genuine. And I met them, initially I met two of them at a conference who had gone fairly public. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was so interesting because they were catching a lot of crap. They were being very strenuously judged, and it was harsh. I don't know that, huh?
They're easy targets. They don't have any proof. They have
they are easy.
But it's that's why it's really difficult to get into that side of the field, and yet we can't sit here and say there's nothing to it.
We cannot, because if the men that I spoke with were not being honest, then they had been very well trained as disinformation agents. Mm-hmm. I mean, there wasn't a lot of in between with that. The information was good. The information was strong. The names affiliated, just the ones that I heard, and I was not familiar with that program at all. I was like, really?
They're only going to remember certain things, or they have memories that are planted. And we first saw that with Montauk in terms of a general awareness that they were able to plant memory in versus just erase it. So, somebody you're talking to may be very genuine about their account because to them it's real and they believe every bit of it. They remember it. Without this other element inside that equation, we could be duped. And I don't mean just the listeners, but the person that, went through this as well.
Yes.
So it's difficult because I have met people that I do believe had an experience that way. They have certain detail that I don't know really where they would have gotten that outside of some sort of military faction or discipline. And yeah, there are a few. I could sit here and tell you names right now. But that being said, on the opposite side of things, I have come across people who genuinely believe that they were XYZ and they weren't. And you have to keep mental acuity and stability in mind when you're speaking to individuals who have, such a fantastic story. I mean, it's not what anybody wants to do, but there are many cases that I've been in interviews and I have to ask the person, I say, do you use any drugs? And I don't mean that in any disrespect, but I need to know, are you on any sort of medication that could be causing XYZ in terms of your experience? So let's rule that out. That's really the idea. But when that element comes in, it may be a factor, it may not, but it's really dependent on the circumstance.
Well, I actually have never asked someone that in an interview. That's a good question to have in your quiver.
Yeah, I mean, if it's necessary,
Well, were you involved in Montauk?
Energetically, I am connected to Montauk intimately. Some of these claims that I'll make, people can ask for a substantiation. If you'd like to, talk to me outside of the show, I can give you as much as I've got. But the three whistleblowers, Al Balick, Duncan Cameron, and Preston Nichols, were all part of my soul family. When I got that realization, and it was confirmed intuitively, not just through me, but I had others that I worked with, it really set me aback, and yet still placed a lot for me, because where I grew up, on the coast of Connecticut, I'm pretty much looking directly across the Sound at Montauk. Gardner's Island is sort of in the way, but Montauk has always been there for me. Now, I couldn't have been a Montauk boy. The project ended in 1984. I was born in 1981. And yet I talked to people that are born in, the late 80s, going into the 90s and so forth, and they were running sister projects that were still coming directly back to Montauk, whether it be energetically or physically. And they claim that they were sent back in time to, visit the first legs of the project, and they were there as observers, and it was part of the process that they went through. So, I mean, again, going into different timelines and possibilities, there's certainly something that we can discuss, but very difficult to validate in any sort of real way. But my connection, going back to your question, is on an energetic level, and one of my responsibilities with this association is to heal a lot of what Montauk had done. And this goes into different dimensions. It goes into different corners of the universe, even quite physically in a sense. There was a lot that was experimented with empirically,
yes,
that did a lot of damage, not only to individuals who, some of them are still lost out in the ethers or some timeline, nobody knows what happened to them, or entire dimensions themselves have been uprighted within their math, and now do not, hold the harmonious signal that they normally would, or signature, within the enveloping dimension of, the 12 dimensions that we have within this matrix, if you will. So that's primarily my responsibility, and to bring about that awareness and healing within the people that were affected, which I have done pretty strongly in terms of spearheading, different things that I could work with in these individuals and how they could heal. But that's what we have time for now. That's what we're here to do now. Yes, we remember the things that happened, but we need to get past the trauma and heal together, because there are some of us who, again, are connected energetically to these types of projects that have the ability to help each other. And as long as we can get into a safe space and have that conversation, I generally find it to be very successful.
Can you share a little bit for people listening who are not familiar with Montauk?
Certainly. It's a very wide-reaching project. It really was comprised of 3 different projects, namely Phoenix 1, 2, and 3. Each one of these built upon the last, and really all of this began with, radio sonde technology, which essentially has to do with, weather manipulation and so forth. Orgone energy with Wilhelm Reich and his experiments with that was also very influential, because orgone energy, when directed properly, can heal anything that ails us. Any physical problem that we have, it can heal us. And also can do the exact opposite when directed a different way. It's a very powerful life force energy that was discovered and started to be utilized a bit more out in the open, through the late 40s and going into the 50s. So, long story short, Montauk happened at Montauk because they began at Brookhaven National Labs. And initially they were trying to figure out a frequency that they could beam at an individual that would allow them to take over that person's mind and very simply said, have mind control. And they experimented for some years, and eventually they did find it, and they brought it to Congress and said, hey, look what we can do. You know, we could weaponize this and this and the other thing. And Congress was not too keen on the idea that, well, they could typically do that to anybody they pointed it at, you know, in terms of that research, including members of Congress. So they defunded it. And yet the Air Force was the one to pick it up. And within that effort, they moved out to Montauk Point, which has Camp Hero. It's a Revolutionary War military base that has been expounded upon and utilized for many years for different reasons. And at the time, it was abandoned. We're looking around the early 60s. And the draw there was that radar tower, which was one of, I think it was less than 10 in the world, the FPS Sage radar system. It's a very specific type of radar system that, again, could be utilized when they start working with different frequencies outside of what it was designed for. It actually sits in a band of frequencies that encompasses the frequency that they had found for mind control. If you guys want to know what that frequency is, it's out there. You can find it, but I'm not going to mention the exact measurement of hertz over, you know, the air here, but it is out there if you're interested in going into that science, because there's something behind it that's also expressed that I'm not going to go into at the moment. So from there, they expounded upon the mind control, which led them into discovering that with enough power, they could actually start opening up portals to different dimensions. So they would just be throwing people into these things to see what would happen. If they came back, if they didn't matter. It's empirical. You know, get somebody else. Oh, this one died. Get them out of here. Get another one in. Very soulless. You know, and
of
yet,
course, our government would never be involved with that, right?
What's that?
I said, of course, our government would never have that inclination at all.
Yeah, of course, right? But, you know, the funny thing was, you know, the traditional government that we are familiar with was not entirely aware of what they were doing. And if you watch my documentary, the second one I did on Montauk, called The Time Is Now, Lost Souls of Montauk, you know, it opens up with John D'Souza, who is responsible for the X-Files. You know, he was the one who had the real files, and that was...
And he's... when he read his first book, we became friends, and we've been friends for a long time now. It's fascinating to me. But I digress.
No,
but I do know who you're talking about in his place.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. I've known him through Third Phase of Moon, more or less. I think I've spoken to him on the phone maybe a couple times throughout the years, but yeah, I mean, they asked him to do this favor for me and sit down and talk about Montauk to the best that he knew, and he did. But again, here's a guy who was in those military factions, and he had the ear on that, you know, people were doing stuff down there, and he could hear some of those details of time travel and going into super soldiers, which was like the latter part of that program. They kind of figured out how to make that work. But, you know, let's just put it this way. If I were to sum it up, it was a manipulation of time, space, and energy, with a focus on mind control and seeing what limits the human body, the emotional body, mental state could take, and then drawing lines, you know, similar to what the Nazis were doing medically during World War II.
You know, it's actually fascinating to me because when I started talking to people that had a background and knowledge of this, I was so surprised. I did not understand, and I was angry that things like that were allowed to happen and happen frequently. I mean, there's been more programs of that nature than anybody would ever want to discuss. And they've been, I mean, they've had moderate, all of them, success rates. And nobody has ever really been held accountable for doing goober things with that. And for lack of a, you know, my technical term. But it's really horrific what happens under the guise of improving things and under the guise of science. We just had a large part of the world population wiped out by a virus that was allowed to be released, and nobody knew what to do with. And
No, and there were
you
a lot
don't,
of thoughts. Yeah.
when you play
Yeah.
with science, you know, it's tough sometimes. And there's
I
rarely
understand.
accountability for that.
There's definitely got to be accountability. The problem is a lot of these things happen within privately funded factions.
Yeah.
And, again, the governments really don't have any say or knowledge about it. I mean, take anything that's retrieved.
Sometimes.
Okay?
Yeah.
If you
Yes,
picked up by
that's true.
Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin, if you pick up by any one of these independent military contractors, and once they have it, they don't have to tell you, and they don't have to tell the government. They don't have to tell anybody anything. They're under no legal obligation to share that. So when you have that type of isolation and succession, you know what I mean? We're going to come into some hiccups here in terms of how we get certain information or what's being released to us, what we're allowed to know. The reason that they're still keeping it secret. I mean, so many other things come up when we look at this a little more deeply and realize who has the reins.
Yes. And it's always the man behind the curtain that's the most dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, these people don't abide by the law like you and I have to. It's not a faction of their life, it's not an element, and they therefore live completely separate realities than we do. Very much in a defining sense, the way that the rich live versus the poor. I mean, it's that great of a gap in terms of what they know and utilize versus what we do.
Yes, it's very frustrating. I want all the toys.
Yeah,
I want
well,
all
no,
the
no.
access. I want all the access to all the toys, and especially the travel that I understand is available. So I think that would be just fantastic.
Well, I mean,
Well,
they're already proving time travel on a quantum level,
yeah.
level publicly today. So
Yes.
the next thing will come out and roll out. I mean, we're so far behind in what we have for knowledge. I've had, people tell me that we're well beyond what you can imagine in terms of the technology we have. And I said, wait a minute, I can imagine time travel. I can
Exactly.
imagine teleportation. I can imagine a lot of different things. You're saying we're beyond that. And that person told me, who was higher up in the echelon of the Air Force, yeah, that's where we're at. He goes, any of those things that you can think of, the Star Wars and Star Trek, all that stuff conceptually, it's all been done. I said, you got to be kidding me. So there's something happening behind the scenes somehow. And of course, one must sit back and wonder, how would you hide something along those lines, a project that's so massive and dumping money into this? There are resources that need to be tapped into. There's got to be a paper trail somewhere. And even in Montauk, we found those paper trails. We found receipts and logging files and documents that show, when food was delivered to the base. And we knew that during that time, there were only supposed to be X number of people there, yet you're buying food for thousands of people. I mean, these little inconsistencies and incongruities go a long way when you start really looking into this stuff.
Well, I mean, you don't really think they paid $25,000 for a hammer.
What's that now?
I said, you don't really think they paid $25,000 for a hammer, do you now? $10,000 for a toilet? Yeah. So that's my favorite movie ever.
Mm-hmm.
But, how did you get access to go and do that research at Montauk?
I had the inclination to go out there at some point. I'd been thinking about it for years and not sure why it took me so long, but there was a draw that I had on a very intuitive level to the point where it was uncomfortable. Like I had to go there. And through some of my networks, I was speaking to an individual by the name of Long Island Bigfoot, fantastic guy who's out in Long Island, clearly. And he said, I have this other guy that has been very involved in Montauk and researching it for almost 40 years. I mean, boots on the ground research, working on putting all this stuff together evidence wise and so forth. Said his name is Brian Minnick. I said, wow, that name sounds really familiar. Not realizing that I had already seen him on the Dark Files with Christopher Garantano, just didn't know it was him. So I got in touch with him, and at the time, he either just started his channel or he wasn't really putting too much effort to it, but he had all this evidence he was literally sitting on in his room. I said, man, you got to do something with this. So within those conversations, we began, throwing things back and forth. And I said, look, I want to do a documentary on Montauk. We knew Peter Moon quite well. In fact, Brian's better friends with Peter than I am. But I said, if we could get Peter to come down to Montauk with us, I mean, again, these people are aging very rapidly. There's not going to be many chances left. Peter's a busy guy anyway, but he was able to accommodate that, and he came out and we ended up, filming over the course of 3 or 4 days. And that was the first documentary that I had put out on that. But yeah, with my relationship with Brian, we realized how much of a passion we had for the truth that was very much wrapped up in a lot of disinformation, legend and lore. And yet Brian had been going to this base, collecting physical pieces of it since the 90s, early 90s. And nobody else out there has done research like that on Montauk or Camp Hero. So it was a natural fit for the both of us. And then, Michael, who is Long Island Bigfoot, has always had his own interest, but it doesn't go as deep as, what Brian and I are trying to accomplish. But he always comes on and enjoys the trips out there with us. But, it's nice to be out there. And yeah, the area feels very strange. And if you know more about what occurred there, sometimes it lets your mind run a little bit. But there's a lot of history that goes into Montauk, and there's a reason that it is what it is in terms of a focus. I mean, just to say, for example, Pharaoh, the name Pharaoh, the surname, which we associate with Egypt, is only found in one other place in the world in our history, and that is in Long Island. Yeah. Okay. People say, well, why? What's the connection? Not realizing that when Pangea was around, Long Island was snuggled nice and tight right there with Egypt. It's literally the same earth that Egypt is. It's just migrated over here. So there's that very distinct connection with the core of that material. And then the cultures are also in that mix as well. Look, when the settlers came over here and they went to Long Island, they noticed that there were pyramids everywhere, some really big ones and some smaller ones. So they went to the Native Americans, the Algonquin at the time, and they said, how did you guys make these pyramids? And they said, well, what do you mean? Which ones? And they go, either of them. You got big ones, you got small ones. They go, well, we didn't make the small ones, but we made the big ones. And they're like, oh, well, who made the small ones? And they pointed up to the sky. They said, oh, the people that come from Mars. Yeah. They said, we don't like them much because they come down here and they take our women and children, and they set up these little pyramids that have something to do with a grid that deals with their electricity the way that they're using it. No real explanation from them, but we find similar stories with the Dogon tribe down in Australia as well. Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into the history of Montauk that makes it much more significant outside of the project, but also very coincidental, I'll say, that they understood the synchronicity of that energy in the land, and they were able to put the project right where they needed to, because that plays a large part in what they were doing too. It had to be about location, it had to be about timing and celestial formation. Like all of that went into this, that whole occult side of things.
It's so fascinating to me, and I don't get to talk to people like you all that often because most of the time they're on the air. When I'm on the air, they're doing stuff. Mm-hmm. But I find it so interesting that utilizing things that aren't supposed to even be real, okay, when they're using celestial mathematics, as it were, and energies, and the information that is so well hidden from the average person, and then randomly somebody like you comes across that. People like your friends, people like the military that had that knowledge to be able to build that and get everything grooving, to actually have the experimentation and experiences that were relevant to that location because of all this esoteric information that nobody's supposed to know, believe, accept, acknowledge. And bada boom, bada bing, there it is being used. And we're sitting here talking about that.
I say to people all the time, I don't care if you don't believe in clairvoyance or, telepathy. It doesn't matter if you believe it. The government does.
Yes, they do. And they utilize that.
They utilize it. So it goes beyond the realm of belief and modality at this point. Yeah. It's really up to the individual to open up and carry an open mind in terms of what is possible, because we're already seeing things that well exceed, what we would have imagined, 20 years ago. Look at the next, handful of years coming up, and when we're talking about singularities and, all different shifts that really rock a paradigm rather than affect, one community or one city or country here or there. This is going to affect everybody. We're in an enormous paradigm shift.
Yes. And so few people will even discuss that, much less acknowledge it.
That's right. That's right.
And
Well, there's fear that's wrapped up into this too. Don't forget that there's the other side of ufology that's trying to keep people in that narrative that, makes them believe that there's a threat. And,
yes,
my side of the field has always come out and said very, very strongly. And, Dr. Stephen Greer is, a good friend of my network, and, Third Phase Moon works with him almost exclusively in certain ways. And this is what he's been trying to dispel as well. There is nothing to fear. Yes, there are entities and energies and extraterrestrials, if you will, that do mean us harm. But there's
yes,
also ones that don't care about us at all. The way that you see somebody's grass and not counting every blade, you know what I mean? Where they're just there.
yes.
And then there are others who are more benevolent to us. And of course, that comes back to the idea that they may be part of our parentage. So
Yeah.
there's logic behind here if you, again, just go deep enough.
Well, there are humans just like that.
That's
We're
right.
married, and I mean, when you feel the energy of somebody that has no interest in keeping a human alive, they're just there for whatever. To me, that's always disconcerting. And I read energy pretty well. And so, it's so strange when you do feel that. And I think that it would be freaky to have another species that I came across that felt that way to me. I wouldn't know what to do.
You have to keep in mind too that even though a lot of these species that we come up against seem very foreign, the only difference here is mostly in a physical sense, the way that we are interpreting that presence, or are willing enough to kind of engage in that, or mesh it into our lives. Now,
Right?
anytime we find a new species of animal on the earth, you read an article about it, you're like, oh, that's cool, spider with 1,200 legs. Okay, neat. And you just sort of move on. It doesn't really affect you, all right? Unless you live in that country of Australia
Kind
when
of
you
rocked
find...
my world just
Yeah.
to contemplate that. So,
Right.
yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
So
sleep
I would,
well. With that being said, uh, so people have seen extraterrestrials, we'll say for the sake of conversation, that look like praying mantis, or they look like cats, or they look like lizard people. And the only difference between the way we've evolved and another species from somewhere else has evolved that holds that facade, if you will, is that was the evolutionary path that they took. So supposedly when we were created, the 6 to 8 species, I think, that were involved in our creation, took minerals from the earth, and of course we have those present in our bodies. But they also took DNA from, apparently in this case, the apes. So we went a very mammalian route, and we have similar characteristics to the ape. It doesn't mean that that's where everything comes from. It means that that's part of our DNA as well. That was part of the mix in the equation. In other spaces where these cultures are developing, again, maybe the lizard was the most conscious entity on the planet at that time, and that's why they decided to use that DNA. Or maybe it was the praying mantis or something akin to it. So these energies are us. They are us wearing different suits. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to understand and then ground into in terms of reality, is that we have a universal family the way that we have a global family.
I agree with that. It just blows my mind because I had a guest at one time, and one of my audience members was like, "Oh my God." But she reads and she does your backgrounds and things of that nature. And she came up during a show and she was like, "Well, your background is something that would bother people. And I don't really want to say that." And I said, "Well, now you've opened the can. You're going to have to tell me what this is." She was like, "Well, you have a reptilian background." And I'm like, "Well, yeah. I mean, that's not freaky." And one of my guests, one of my listeners was like, "Oh my God, my friend is reptilian." And I was like, "I haven't eaten you yet. I think you're okay." But it was really an interesting conversation because I had not recognized that Kimberly was going to be bringing that to the show. So that was lots of fun. Because,
Kimberly O'Connor?
huh?
Was it Kimberly O'Connor?
No, it was
Okay, I
Kimberly
wasn't sure if
McGregor.
you were talking about the same person. All right, I figured I'd ask.
But it was really funny. But we have a question for you in chat. Are you up for it? We'll have to come back to this topic. As a kid, did you ever play or make a game called Buckets of Blood?
What's it called?
Buckets O' Blood.
No, I can't say I did.
Okay.
Sorry.
Then I don't know what that question was for. But it was from Linda Judd, who said that you've been on with her. So that was, I just figured that it was something from that show. So
I
on
don't
Dark Hour
honestly-
Paranormal.
I don't remember. I mean, I remember Dark Horse Paranormal. That was we'd had a fantastic time. But unless I'm given a little bit of detail, I've been doing this so long. I don't really remember what show they've been on. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I remember Dark Horse Paranormal. I absolutely remember those.
Yeah. So now we're going to have to find out what Buckets of Blood is. So she's going to have to put a dissertation in the chat room.
Okay.
So, well,
Waiting the day to death.
we'll be waiting. We'll be reading it out loud, Linda. Go ahead. But why is this something that you have? Because you're very involved. You work with Stephen. You'd work with so many people that are, I think, really interesting humans in this field. What made you feel so strongly that this was the way that you wanted to go? I mean, the CE5, I love that. In fact, my guest next week is Costa Macraeus, who is very involved in that. And so that's not something that people take lightly. And I assume that you don't either in your work with that.
That's correct.
How did you get so involved with Stephen and get all of this stuff grieving?
A lot of it has to do with timing and just people that I've met along the way. In going from radio to YouTube was not something I had intended to do. But I was told at a certain point by an individual that this is where things were going and that you kind of have to. I'm like, heck, being old school, I want to stay on radio. That's what I'm familiar with. But I eventually, found my way in that and became natural. But it all kind of started, I think it was like my third or fourth show that I was doing. I was at my house and I went into the kitchen to wash my hands. I'm trying to think, what show I should do, who I should do it on. And I looked over at the soap and it was Meyer's soap or whatever. I'm like, oh, Billy Meyer. Let's do a show on Billy Meyer, right? So old case, but I'm still cutting my teeth on YouTube, so that's fine. So I get on there and I absolutely talk terribly about Billy. And I was like, yeah, look at this photo. He's holding a string over here, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going off, right? I don't really think many people are listening to me at this point because I'm a new channel. I don't have many subscribers. And sure enough, Michael Horn, the English-speaking ambassador for Billy Meyer, found me and listened to the show. Well, I got a very comprehensive email that I will only say left me with an earful. And that if I wanted to know the truth, I was to contact him. And I said, all right, fine. So I started talking to higher caliber guests, I would say, early on, because this was sort of something that gravitated towards what I was doing. And yes, COVID, again, going into the timing, that did play a part in what people were able to do in terms of availability. Right. So in going through this, I ended up meeting a very, very close friend of mine today. His name is Rich Giordano from the channel Goof On. And, this guy has over 10,000 hours of watching the sky. He's very versed in ufology. It's what he's always done. So we very quickly became friends. And it's around the same time, he started working with ThirdPhase Moon. And, that seemed like his gig at the time. And I'm kind of sitting back peripherally. I'm like, okay, cool. And very slowly, ThirdPhase Moon kind of wheedled their way into my life. And it was one evening that, Rich says to me, he says, listen, I'm going to call you after, the show tonight and ThirdPhase wants to talk to you. And I said, oh, wow. Okay. So I get on the phone with them and they asked me to be a panel member and, attain certain responsibilities within their productions and, maybe even travel at certain points and help with the documentaries and all that. I said, yes, I'm absolutely flattered to do this. So we ended up cultivating a friendship very early on, which put me into contact with other folks, including Stephen Greer, who I have not actually met in person yet. It's been a very peripheral relationship I've had with Stephen, working very much with, ThirdPhase Moon. I've done various jobs behind the scenes that involve him as an individual, but he's also somebody who's really difficult to have him sit down for a minute. So, I mean, the fact that Third Phase has cut 4 or 5 documentaries, featuring him has really been something that nobody else has really done before. So, yeah, again, just to answer your question there, it's a lot about the networking that I've done and the relationships that I have developed that have led me in different directions in getting to know certain people that I may not have the opportunity to know, otherwise.
Yeah, I think that what he does is so important, because being able to bring acknowledgement and experience to the general public is what's going to move this field.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so cool. So I'm a deck sitter, a hammock layer. I have dogs. I'm outside all the time. Mm-hmm. And I have a really good area of clear sky. And it's amazing what you see if you're just, sitting outside.
Oh, yes.
And day or night. And the daytime ones are a little freakier than at night, because they're very much more in your area and interacting. It's just like, no, I'm the only one here. I was on the phone with my daughter one day, and I'm like, do not hang up. I don't care what happens. Don't hang up. And she was like, what? I'm like, just trust me. I'll let you know later. But yeah, I wasn't interested in a lost time incident. Certainly not on the phone with my kid, right? But that would be that would have been so hard to explain. Okay. So but I really love that this program, through really the strength of Stephen's character and energy, is getting so many people out skywatching to be able to have an experience and understand that there is communication. It's not just random. It can be random, but if you're actively trying, it's not random to get an interaction.
That's right.
I think that's really special and really cool. And that alone would probably freak a lot of people out, but I think it's a gift.
Well, it puts the power in people's hands. It empowers you as an individual. And a lot of people aren't ready for that type of power yet. They're still worried about a monotheistic guy that lives in the sky. You know what I mean? I'm going to pick on some of those religions that, have the same format, because it's so old. And if you just go into the history of these secret societies, you'll find where they were born. Yeah. So how do you continue to, deny that reality is something much more than what, you initially see or make of it, because you have a story that you've been given, and someone else's idea of what the world is, you're given that at an early age. It's only about in adolescence that you get a chance to actually think about things for yourself. And of course is where you get rebellion and so forth from. But, on a spiritual level, you haven't had a chance to even decide what's real and what isn't. And now you've subscribed to something that you can't substantiate. Look, when people say, I feel Jesus, or, I'm feeling the Virgin Mary. Sure, I believe that that's happening, but it's the verbiage that you're using, which is disengaging to certain people. And for what we're doing moving forward, people are free to keep that religious modality, whatever it may be, if what they're comfortable with. But they have to go into this understanding that, if we do meet on a larger level, an extraterrestrial species, or even something that's terrestrial living in the earth and, now comes up, but looks like it's an extraterrestrial, there's going to have to be an adjustment for that. And they will have to augment that truth within what they believe. But again, in doing that, you have to understand that the truth is more fluid than not. So, things can change. Are we ready for that change? Well, there are a lot of people say that we are. And people like you and myself, Kat, we certainly are. But it's also our job in what we're doing to very gently introduce what may come up sooner than later to audiences that don't necessarily have that perception.
Well, I'm more geared towards coming out of the sky than coming up out of the ground.
It's both. Honestly, we've got.
I know it is both. I know it's both. But
people want to make it one or the other. And I'm like, no, it's both.
Well, I mean, because look how many of us there are, and how many different ways we look. I mean, it's not unrealistic to think that everything is likely to change pretty quickly with just one introduction.
Well, I mean, the thing is, too, I went to Belize few years ago with the company RKOX that I founded with Jared Murphy, and we were given exclusive access to a site that most other people, including government officials, are not allowed to go on. It's privately owned. It's the only one in the country by a Mayan culture. And it was only then when I got there and we went up into the woods and we started seeing the caves that I realized that the Mayans, by and large, lived in caves.
Mm-hmm.
They lived underground. So, if we can do it, and we've done it as a populace.
Well, I mean, we have,
do it. Yeah.
I just think that, and it's just going back to old episodes of Fate or old, what are those, the Fright Night movies or whatever, that I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with a burrowing kind of looking humanoid creature. And I don't know why. Some things I'm fine with, some things not so much. And I'm not afraid of really meeting anybody. I would like that opportunity. But it's and I thought I was going to get a chance, but when the craft came out of the cloud, there weren't any portholes. I was so bummed out about that. Sort of. But it was just like, all right, look, there's something that's moving out of that. There was a yellow cloud that was so low, it was over my gazebo coming through my backyard. And I'm like, that's when I was on the phone with my daughter. And I'm like, okay, don't hang up. Just don't hang up. And then nothing. The front of it came out at the cloud and then it pulled back in and then it left. And I was just like, you're still there, right? I'm still awake. This isn't, yeah. And she's like, yeah, Mom, what's happening? So that was interesting. But, I wasn't afraid then. I didn't want lost time. I didn't want to not be there when my husband came back and nobody know what was going on. So I was just like, just don't hang up. Just, whatever happens, don't hang up. And so it wasn't like I was, and every time that I have tried to report an incident to MUFON 3 different times, their system never accepts it.
That's MUFON for you.
And I actually called their, director of whatever and said, look, I've tried to report something 3 different times, 3 different incidents, and your system doesn't work. It's terrible. 3 times. And he was like, well, you need to put that in work. I said, I'm trying to do it. So now I'm reporting it to you because you're over that, So that didn't go over well. But we were friends. So, he didn't hate me forever. So it's really interesting to me that I'm just this random chick, in the southern U.S. who's seeing things and experiencing things. And, I actually got very excited once because I thought I was seeing the Starlinks. I'd never seen them. So I didn't know what to look for. And what I saw were 2 illuminated barrel-looking things that were moving together. And I have an air refueling wing base near me, which was pointed out to me. I was like, I know what they look like. They don't look like, toilet paper rolls, short toilet paper rolls that are illuminated from inside. They're craft, and only one end is lit on both of them, where the nozzle comes out and where the receptacle is. That's how that works. So I was told that, nope. And a MUFON expert told somebody in front of me when they saw it that, oh, well, that's Starlink. So that's why I was excited thinking it was Starlink. So,
usually they're a string of lights.
Well, I've seen them now. I mean, I was, Mark D'Antonio was doing a thing at Contact in the Desert with the, Skywatch, which is his bag. And he's very good at it. I didn't mean to sound derogatory. I think he's brilliant. But I got to see them. And so now I know what I'm looking for. or what I'm seeing when I see them. But it was so, I mean, I was so excited thinking that was Starlink because that's what he told that guy in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, all right, this is so exciting. So, you know, I'm really looking forward to an opportunity maybe to get to meet someone because I've come so close. But to my knowledge, I haven't.
You know, out of all the experiences I've had, I can say that I don't have one in recollection where I came into direct contact with an extraterrestrial up until recently. So I did an interview with Dr. Jonathon Reed about a month or so ago. Maybe it was almost 2 months now, about a month and a half. And, you know, one of the things that he told me off screen was that, you know, occasionally people that interview him get a visit from his alien friend, Freddie. And I said, all right, that's fine. I'm okay with that.
Cool.
And, you know, it was just sort of a warning. And I'm like, all right, yeah, no problem. And we continued on, you know, talking about something else. And sure enough, there was a night where I was playing some mini golf on my Oculus with a friend of mine. And I finished up. And as I put the Oculus down, I turned around and I saw for just a brief moment what looked to be some type of extraterrestrial sitting in my chair. And then to the left of him were three other beings that looked like ribbons of light. So they didn't look anything like him if they were with him. And as I kind of gathered my senses for that half second that I saw them physically, I realized that I was having a conversation with them that was deeply involved. It had something to do with spirituality, and that the conversation was now over. And whoop, that was it. They all just disappeared in front of my eyes.
Oh, wow.
And I stood there scratching my head saying, wait a minute, did I just see what I think I saw? You know, and I'm trying to feel this out. And as I talked to a friend about it afterwards, he says, did you feel threatened? I'm like, no, they felt like friends. There was everything natural in between us, but apparently while I was playing Oculus, going into these other timelines and thoughts, right, I was having a conversation with this one and whatever those three were over there. So that's the only time I've actually had that experience. I have yet to tell Jonathon. I have him coming on again on Tuesday night, so I'll be speaking with him off camera about that.
I'll be listening.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see if there's any sort of corroboration in the visits that he gets. But yeah, outside of that, I've never really had an experience. I mean, I've seen UFOs. I've seen the traditional Bob Lazar sports model. You know, when I was 19, I saw that. Yeah. Then I saw a PR3B when I was in my mid-20s. But yeah, nothing in terms of real interactions with a biological entity.
Well, you're the only person I have spoken with who has seen the light beings. I think that's interesting.
I didn't know what to make of them. And even today, if I were to sit down and draw them, there was something very etheric about their makeup, wherein I knew that they were there, they were utilizing the space that they were in, and yet they weren't. So there was something about that physiology that I can't really put my finger on, but that's the best way I can describe it, like thick ribbons of light. I mean, the ribbons were about this thick and, you know, went up almost like it looked like a stick figure with no head.
Oh, wow.
They were conscious beings. I don't know if they were tag-alongs or whatever the case was. You know, I don't know what they were doing along with this other one that was sitting in my chair. But yeah, I've never seen anything quite like that.
I wonder if they were peers or if they were, you know, like travel buddies that were just information gathering.
Yeah, all above could be possible. We could only sit in the realm of conjecture with this one, really. Unless they come back and I can ask them.
Well, let me know.
Well, I will.
Because, you know, I think that was cool. I have not interviewed Jonathon Reed, but I have spoken with him, and I find him so interesting. So
I love the case, and I have to say, out of everything that I've come across and that's come across my desk, this one really takes the cake because of the evidence that he has, and because of the witnesses that were there to view the body, and you know, during the 8 days that he had it in his possession. Multiple points of evidence that can be corroborated, all the way down to DNA and RNA sequencing. This is not something you generally have with, you know, a typical UFO case. Jonathan's story is so much more involved, and the only thing I feel bad about is that he's had a hell of a time trying to get this out there just to talk about it. I mean, obviously, excuse me, in the way that somebody like Phil Schneider's life was uprooted by the information that he carried around and talked about. The same things have happened to Jonathon. Thankfully, Jonathon is still with us. They weren't, these attempts weren't successful.
Yeah.
But there were things that did happen, and he has people around him that protect him because it's necessary. Even in going through to get in touch with Jonathon, I had to speak with Dr. J Radio Live, who was Art Bell's producer, and this is how he knew Jonathon and what have you. So he'd interviewed him about a year ago or so, and I was really excited to see what those interviews produced, because it was just so in depth. So when we did this interview together, he actually co-hosted with me at Jonathon's behest.
Right.
It was a familiar face and voice, so to speak. It turned out fantastic, and yet we only brushed the surface. So we'll be getting back to that on Tuesday.
Well, I will be listening. I just find his case to be so interesting. I think that you have a lot of contacts that I enjoy, so I am catching up. Is what I'm doing. So, well, I just found you fairly recently, so it's interesting to me. Huh?
I'm so glad you did.
I am too. Well, what do you think is why do you think that Jonathon's case has been so buried?
It's a product of its era. If this happened today, it would be a lot more difficult to cover up. But again, just like Phil Schneider, I mean, he had something that certain parties did not want others to know about, and for all we know, there might have been some involvement with that conviction and determination. But it's one of the most compelling stories that's out there, and it's not easily discredited because there's so many different facets to this. I mean, how many other UFO cases or interaction cases that you come across where somebody has a physical artifact from their interaction, and they can wear it, and they go on public television, live television in Mexico, and demonstrate the thing making them disappear? Look, I understand all manner of camera trickery, but this was performed in front of a live studio audience.
Yeah.
So again, Jaime Maussan was present. There are multiple witnesses to corroborate what Jonathon claims, even in the most fantastic of ways. And that, again, is something we just don't have in other cases that perhaps should.
Well, I think that he's been done very poorly.
Oh, absolutely. That's intentional.
It's just, It was so traumatic. And I feel like it would have been so traumatic. So,
not many people would have survived.
No.
Jonathon's a true warrior. Yep.
But so where do you see yourself going with your next phase of research? What is your passion right now?
I suppose the answer to that question is sort of reflected in what I'm currently involved in. I'm working on a book that is directly focused on my paranormal experiences, theory, and certain factions of the paranormal world I think need to be spoken about in certain opinion. Just sort of a benchmark for where we are right now. So I'm putting that together. Hopefully that'll be done by the end of the summer. I'm also working on another Montauk documentary. This will be the third in the trilogy, and for the foreseeable future, probably the last of this type. I mean, I will continue to research with Montauk, but I'm going to be a little bit more niche when going into certain areas of that subject after this documentary. But in that we have some pretty interesting things to discuss and present, going from the reel-to-reel tape that we had found on our first initial jaunt out to Camp Hero, which we have had analyzed, and I have lots of thoughts on that, all the way to an individual that we met in Camp Hero who was a native of that area and remembers all the stories going throughout the 70s specifically that talked about, kids being taken over to the camp and what they were doing there and so forth. I was with Brian when we met him, and he said, were you guys part of the group that pulled out the chair from the underground? And wait a minute, what do you mean? What chair? He goes, oh yeah, the psychic chair that they were using. And I said, yeah, we know of it, but as far as we know, nobody's seen it. He goes, oh yeah, my daughter's got a picture of it. They pulled it up from the underground. I said, we need to speak to her. So there are some leads
Wow.
that we have that would just be incredible and blow a lot of things out of the water that, the last generation that brought this to light was not able to produce. So working on that steadily. I'm also putting together a Bigfoot documentary with Long Island Bigfoot. I began filming that about 1.5 years ago, and that should be out, if all goes well, by the end of the summer. But that's a very curious foray into not just your traditional idea of what a cryptid is, but more so how we connect with those cryptids when we put ourselves in their environment. Mike is somebody who is a Reiki master and turns on that Reiki before he walks into a forest. And this guy has animals gravitate towards him like he's made a sausage. He went out into the woods the other day and this little raccoon's following him around. Doesn't seem to be sick, ill, anything like no rabies, none of that. He's an animal whisperer, and he does the same thing. And a lot of times his analysis is more right-brained. Although I've been standing in the woods with him and he shows me something, a little face over in the bushes, and I'm like looking over towards it. I'm like, is that the leaf? Is that pareidolia? And then immediately I see it just fade in front of me and realize that was a space that something just occupied. Yeah. So I've seen it with my own eyes. So I want to bring that to the audiences and give a little bit of a different angle in terms of the staunch scientific community, which we will touch upon, but we won't stay focused within that domain. We're going to go more into the peripheral analysis and anecdotal analysis of what cryptids are. So, those things are, for the moment, keeping me busy.
I don't think you have any trouble staying busy.
The Paracons I'm doing this year, So
yeah, I was going to say, I don't think you have trouble staying busy. Well, when you start doing your work with Long Island Bigfoot, we have things happening here in Alabama, and there's some serious research going on around the state relevant to just really strong anomalies. And then there's a lot of Bigfooters who are interesting to talk to here too. I have not gone on a Bigfoot expedition per se. It's not something that I've ever felt pulled to do, but I'm so curious. Have you had many cryptid experiences?
Not nearly as many as I've had with the paranormal, if we were to make a distinction, but yes, I have. The first time I really came across a cryptid, I was planning to go camping with a girl I was with many years ago. I think I was maybe 25, 26. And this was a state park, what have you. And I'd been there before, but we're walking up the trail in the pitch dark, and there's a body of water to our left. And I start hearing these small stones being thrown in the water towards us. So we stop. I'm like, do you hear that? She says, yeah. I'm like, what do you think that is? She's like, I'm not sure. That's weird. But we continue to walk. I continue to hear these stones being thrown. Next thing you know, I feel in the air something akin to like a tightness. And it just kind of hits me all of a sudden. Maybe if I were to look on it now, it felt sort of like anger. I don't really know. But I felt something in the air. It had changed. And immediately I hear an enormous boulder fall into the water. Now, there are no rock facades that way over some of the cliff areas where something naturally could just fall down. Something had to find this stone, bring it to the water's edge, and then huck it in. So while I didn't see anything, I now understand the activity of walking into a cryptid domicile, if you will, where they reside. And this is exactly what that experience was. In another case, I was out on Long Island. We were in the Pine Barrens, and it was myself, Long Island Bigfoot, and Brian Minnick. And we were out at night just going in to see what was there, because the forest is full of energy, and it's a matter of how you tune into it. Generally can dictate what you experience. And, I'm in the woods with a Montauk historian and somebody who goes out in the woods all the time. Mike is a retired military guy. I mean, he has bearings like you wouldn't believe, and we get lost. We're in the woods. We're lost. It's pitch dark out. We don't know where we are. And somehow we find ourselves eventually getting to the opposite side of the lake that we were camped on. And we could see some of the reflection in the distance, the glows of the fires. And we're like, okay, so now we have an orientation. We couldn't figure out or decide or agree on which way was back. And we were on one trail. So there was a disorientation that was happening. And this was the initial onset of what was to come. So we just make a decision and we start heading back on the trail. And off to my right, I feel something walking with us. So I look over and I see an enormous shadow that was in the shape of a humanoid that was probably 6.5 to 7 feet tall, bigger than me. And it's moving fluidly, almost as a reflection in a mirror. And when I stop, it stops. When I move forward, it moves forward. It was only then I realized that there were red eyes associated with it as well. And I'm thinking, good Lord, whatever. I'm not going to make too much of a deal about it. And this thing followed us for, I don't know, the latter part of maybe 10, 15 minutes, heading back towards where we thought camp was. Well, once we got out of that experience, out of that energy, it seemed like everybody knew exactly which way to go. So there was something acting on us, and maybe it was predatory, maybe it was observational. I couldn't say, other than the fact that we didn't feel threatened, we didn't get attacked. But something was definitely there. And I think it went well beyond what I've experienced in terms of paranormal phenomena. Phenomenon.
Well, it sounds like it was an intelligent being that was getting you away from whatever it was protecting, but making sure you got out okay.
Perhaps more the former than the latter, but I don't know. I don't know the disposition of that one, No indication there.
I have found that if there is negative intent, it's not hard to recognize. And it doesn't sound like that was going on. It sounds more like, oh, no, you're far enough. We're going to get you that way. We're going that way. And I've had that happen too.
That's the case. I mean, I can't say it was helpful. I didn't really feel anything in terms of that direction. It was only the absence of that entity wherein we kind of figured out where we were going. But certainly I think we wandered into an area that we were not welcome in. And perhaps, this was one that was surveying, how far we might be going, or, trying to figure out our intention being there. It's possible. I mean, sometimes these things do mask their true intention, and you see them as one thing and then realize very quickly that that's not what it was, what it is.
Yeah.
But it depends on the circumstance, really, and the energy that you're up against. Is this elemental, or is this something more developed in terms of consciousness? You kind of have to ask yourself when you come up against something like that in the field.
How do you ascertain or differentiate between energies, I guess, for lack of a better term? How do you read them?
Depends on the format. And what I mean by that is, there's a difference between channeling through a clairvoyant sense and having somebody come in versus something that's in your natural environment. Many cases, it's very difficult to make that assertion. You kind of have to just go on the merit that there's something there, and in a scientific way, kind of analyze and describe what it is based on its behavior, and then find patterns in more historical experiences or cases that may mimic or be familiar to give some sort of name to whatever you're working with. In most cases, you don't get that. I can tell you if an energy is acting benevolent or malevolent, but I can't necessarily always tell you who that person was, because they may lie too, or they may project themselves to be something that they're not. Especially when you go into these non-human consciousness, these entities, they embody something much different than what we're aware of or what we live in terms of familiarity. And it's very easy for them to manipulate people, especially in a weakened state, or perhaps, God forbid, a child. I've seen many cases where that was what was happening. And, just like, for example, Annabelle the doll, very famous case, the homeowners thought that they were talking to a little girl. And, whatever validity is actually, with that. And unfortunately, we have to look at the Warrens cases with a huge grain of salt these days. The pattern is still there. You have something come in, it seems to be something that wants to be a part of, the family, the energy. It's at very least benign. In better, senses, there's an ambivalence. And then you come to find out that was just a way to get in, just a way to get you.
And it seems that when that is the goal, they're very good at that. I mean,
but they do. Yeah.
And have you been fooled?
Yes. In different ways, believe it or not. I can tell you that in my experiences, I've had 2 non-human entities follow me home. Both of them lasted for about 3 months independently of each other. Even though they were sort of consecutive, they were separated by about 6 to 7 months. And the first entity I was aware of. I knew that it was on the grounds. I was told by another investigator not to go to a specific area because this thing would latch on, and he had to get rid of it off of another investigator some 8 months prior to me going out there, and just, to play it safe, don't go over there. So fine. I mean, I was filming a pilot for a television show at the time, and there was enough for us to work within the acreage that I didn't necessarily have to go over to the area that he was mentioning. So I went out to this location, did the investigation. I had 2 guys with me, and this thing came to us. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it didn't have anything to do with me or certain provocation. There was a point where I started getting frustrated, and I don't know why, because that's not typical of being on an investigation. I generally am very patient. If you're not getting any results, that's fine. We do something else, try it again, whatever. You just accept what you get. But for some reason, I started getting frustrated that evening, and I attribute it to that one's energy that eventually came in full force. And I was in a root cellar, and there's one small opening, the doorway, where I could see the lights from the city in the horizon, but that's the only light that's available to me. But that being said, if somebody were to come in, I can see their shadow, against the background, and I can make out, that outline. Okay. So when this thing came in, it punched in through and went right behind me. It stood behind me screaming. I've never heard anybody so angry in my entire life, but it seemed to have infinite energy for this ire and rage, which it was then screaming at me, "What do you want? What do you want?" And I'm telling him, like, I didn't call you. I don't want anything. Like, why are you here? And it doesn't hear me. It just keeps screaming. But as soon as it had come in, all these little minions, the way I call them, smaller shadows, humanoid, followed and very soundlessly filed all the way around the perimeter of the inside of the room. It was a very disorienting experience because you see motion and expect to hear sound, but it's even worse than not having sound. It's the deep intentional absence of that sound, which is much more unsettling than sitting just in a quiet environment. So I decided to take a break. I went out, and one of my investigators joined me, and he actually heard the thing walking around. And I didn't audibly hear that, but he was telling me that that's what he heard, and he didn't want to be there anymore. And I said, well, at very least, we can go back into that root cellar and get our stuff. Like, this is not what we do. And back then, I'm talking 2007, 8. I had taken up the disposition that I would yell at my other investigators if they decided they didn't want to do something. You know what I mean? When it came to being scared, right. Much the way that we understand who Zach Bagans is today. But back then, I thought there was something to that sort of conduct. Well, there wasn't.
You learn.
Yeah, and I learned very, very hard, let's put it that way, because as we, stayed there for another 20 minutes, by the way, time was non-existent while I was there. I entered a completely different space where time did not have any relevance. So, what felt like 2 hours might have been 10, 20 minutes and vice versa. It was a very strange space to be in. I get in the car with my other investigator, and we're driving out, and I look at him and I say, I don't feel right. He goes, yeah, man, that was a really weird experience. And I'm like, no, something's wrong. He's like, oh, well, I don't know what to tell you, man. I'm like, yeah, me neither. So he drops me off at home, and As soon as I get home, that's when it all began. Like, this thing was with me, and it was in my mind's eye. And anytime I would close my eyes, I could still see it. So sleep was pretty much off the table at this point. And when I was able to get to sleep, it would enact some sort of sleep paralysis that would startle me up, and I would never be able to get any sleep. And this went on for, as I mentioned, a few months. It drained me. It took everything out of me. It affected family members. It affected friends that were around me. It affected the job that I had. Anything that you can imagine this thing would touch, that you hold dear or have some sort of energy that you've invested in life, it had a finger in. And it got to the point where I was experiencing such high levels of anxiety and dread that were consistent. I couldn't take it anymore. I could not ignore this one that was still there screaming, because that's what I had largely done, just turned away. Yep, still screaming at me, never changed the pace, never let up. So finally, I'm driving to work one day, and I said, you know what? I'd rather face this thing and take whatever consequence comes than deal another day the way I've been living. So through a very quick intentional meditation, that's what I did. And as soon as I turned around, that thing was waiting for me. So again, starts on me. What are you doing? Why am I here? What do you want? And I said, to be quite honest with you, and I paraphrase this because it took a little bit more convincing than I make it sound. I said, I wasn't even there for you. I was there to talk to the others that, you pretty much have hunkered there. And, there are stories that go into that. I said, it was never my intention to bother you. And that was the motif of what I was trying to say. That was the overall theme of what I needed to convey. And as I continued to repeat these words in certain ways, I could see him in my mind's eye moving backwards, moving back, until it was way at the end, like a football field away, on the horizon, just sitting there. No interaction, can't feel it, but I can see it. And that's where it stayed for about another 3 months, but never came back up towards me. And then it disappeared. Well, sometime later, years later, I did find the other investigator that had that same experience. And when I spoke to her, I was blown away by the similarities that we had within the experience, down to certain details that we could very readily agree that it was the exact same entity that plagued us both. Now, the only difference is I only caught it once. She ended up getting rid of it, thinking she was good enough to go back, and got it again. So she has, I think, 2 books out on the subject. Her name is Joni Mayhem.
Oh, I know Joni Mayhem.
No, well, that's who I'm talking about.
Well, I haven't talked to her in years, but she's always fascinated me. I think
yes,
she's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah, we did a show together. Fantastic. Yeah, go ahead.
That is so intense, though.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, the second one I caught was at a completely different location, and I won't go through the detail now, but long story short, I had some crazy experiences in this clandestine graveyard out in the middle of nowhere. A buddy of mine I worked with seemed to know about it and had experiences there, so he wanted to take me. And this thing comes home with me, and I'm getting the same exact sort of feelings. Like, I can feel it around me, to the point where it's so intense. My body is vibrating so intensely, I can't eat. I'm losing appetite. This is the type of thing that would happen. And like pulling my hair, whispering my name in my ear just as I'm falling asleep, stuff that would keep you in a weakened state. Well,
sure.
That one, this is the curious thing. That one was actually a watcher spirit. So it came with me, I would guess, because I was the most sensitive out of anybody in that group. And there were more people than were supposed to be there. And I felt that the energy was very discombobulated, and that, if there was something, that probably would attract it. But long story short, about 3 months later, which it was a different experience, but just as intense, this thing left, and I could immediately feel the difference. Now, I wanted to go back to that graveyard over the past few years. And even though I looked at going to that first location where I had that entity, I realized that it's off limits for me. That's the only place I cannot go. So I'm not going to test faith here. Test fate. So I said, okay, no, it's not worth it. I said, I want to go back to this graveyard, but I don't want to deal with the entity the way that I did. I said, what do I have to do? And intuitively, I heard 3 things that I need to do in order to go back to that graveyard and do it in the right way. Because I wanted to do an episode on this experience. I had to tell somebody, and I just couldn't, do this, otherwise. So Spirit told me, you are to buy a flower or a bouquet and you leave it at the front gate out of the sign of respect. Great, no problem. Second thing is you're going to find whoever you need to talk to in terms of the town, and you're going to make a small donation for the care of this graveyard. Now, I'll tell you, that was a lot more difficult than said, because this is like one of those ones way off on the peripheral and nobody really knows about it. But I was able to do that. And the third one was, if you do broadcast this, you cannot reveal the location. Nobody wants to be bothered over there. I said, all right, fair enough.
Fair enough.
So when I went into that meditation, I actually met with all the spirits that were there, and they came around me, and it was like a meeting. And there was that large one that eventually said, yes, you can come back. You are welcome. So I do. And I bring the original guy that showed me where this place was. And it was just the two of us. So we're going through, I go through my motions, and I feel much better going in there. I don't feel bad. There's nothing oppressive. I feel like I'm supposed to be there. So I go over to the one distinct grave that's in the graveyard, which apparently he believes the last person who was executed in Massachusetts as a witch is laid. I don't know that for sure, but it is a very interesting grave. And it does have a weird energy about it. I've noticed that in the past. So I'm over there standing by the grave, and I'm dictating this story. I have him filming me. All of a sudden, he starts laughing. It, interrupts my concentration. I said, what's so funny? He goes, you know what it is. And as soon as he says it, I can feel that one on my right side. It's huge and just lapping me in waves of energy. I'm like, oh, why? He's standing right there. He's like, hey, dude, he's standing right next to you. I'm like, yeah, I feel that. He goes, you want to know something even funnier? I said, what? He goes, he's lapping at your face like a dog, like an ally. I said, no kidding. Sure enough, I had done the right thing. I came back the way I did, and it is now an ally. And I'm welcome back there anytime I want to go.
How cool
but I can't do that with the other one.
No, yeah. Well, at least you got good advice for that. I mean,
oh yeah.
But a lot of times people, when they are doing the investigations, seem to just want to get that negative reaction. And it's not necessarily something that they benefit from, but they always try to stir up and irritate and agitate. And I have never understood that. I have, when I was in a location and I felt like something was trying to get into my bubble, just said, you know what? No, this is my space. And I'd really prefer that you not come into that. I'm not coming up trying to hug you or touch you or do anything weird. So this is me. And I've only had one time that didn't work, but as a rule, it does.
It should. Yeah. It should. I mean, the entity that I caught on the initial experience was an entity that was not supposed to be here. It was drummed up by a group of occultists that did not know how to put it back. And it belonged in another existence altogether, but it was predatorial. So it did not respond to white light. It did not respond to prayer. It did not respond to traditional protection. If I lit incense in the house, the thing would become irate. It didn't do anything but make it mad. So I had to, seek help on that, on how to work with that, knowing that this was an entity that was non-human, had never been human before, and was not supposed to be here. So yeah, traditionally, like you say, you put that boundary out there. It's in many cases respected by spirit, but there are some that will just say, ass, nuts to that. We're doing what we want to do, and they'll do it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you're coming into my world right now, so your rules don't count. That's what I got.
The provocation, I'll tell you why people do that, because that's the quickest way in people's minds to get a response. If you go into a crowd of people and you start calling somebody a mother effer and this and the other thing, guess what? Someone's going to be talking to you real quick. You know what I mean? That negative attention attracts that violent type of response, which is what some people feel they need in order to feel validated in what they're experiencing. Look, I was somebody who looked for that. And for me, it was a thirst, the way that, you need water when you're thirsty. Like, I had to have that dark experience. I needed that for me, something in it. And when I did have it, I realized it was just always a facet of myself. There was a part of me that was that dark, and I needed to recognize it. Not that I wanted to act on it or that I wanted to experience it again, but I needed that initial sense that I could then place as a blueprint and say, this is a part of who I am too. So that was my reason for doing it, even though it was still wrong.
I think everybody has that side, though.
They do, but some don't necessarily want to acknowledge that at all. And they're more than happy to go through life knowing that there's something there, but don't know what it is. But look, we got to face these things within ourselves. Otherwise, how can we truly be complete?
Well, exactly. I mean, we have more than one side. And, that's like the woman that I told you was telling me on the air that I'm reptilian.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that's not the worst. I mean, they're smart. They can be compassionate. They just look different. And they can not have respect for us as our species. So, I'm not going to be tripped out. And she was so hesitant to say it on the air. And I'm like, no. I mean, and then my sweet little friend was so, so gung-ho on the ghost hunting side of it, when that was so funny because she put it in chat. Oh my God, my friend is a reptilian. And I'm like, not out here. This is still me. You've known me forever. Why is this tripping you out so bad? But, it was just so interesting to see that reaction, because
I mean, look, how many lives have you lived that you know of? I mean, God knows. I mean, the number could be infinite to a certain degree, the way that we would, measure that out. Yeah. So, I mean, there could be over, what's the word I'm looking for? Some sort of
overlap, maybe
bleeding through. Because, again, taking out the linearity of time the way that we know it, we're everything all at once. We're having any experience that we're ever going to have in the present moment. So therefore, within that logic, anything is accessible, whether it be past, future, or what have you, because once you take that into consideration, know how to work it, you just pull it from the present moment. That's it. So we have all of those things in us right now, and some of them we wear on our sleeves, and some of them we don't.
That's true. Being able to jump between, though, I haven't mastered that.
That can take lifetimes for some, and
I think so.
Everybody has their own path with that. That's right.
And I also think that people tend to try to hide from some of them. Like her with that reaction. I feel like if somebody had told her that, she would have just come undone. And that's okay, because not everybody interacts with things the same way. So,
I would agree. I said I would agree.
Yeah. But that was interesting. And, I'll have energies here. Most of mine are family, but I'll have energies here. And my daughter-in-law will be like, I just saw your dad. And I'm like, well, he's around. I mean, I got hurt and had to be taken care of for a while. And so she was here as my caregiver, and she kept on seeing things. I'm like, I'm hurt. Okay. They're looking after me too, but they can't, help me get in a wheelchair. I need you too. But, it was so weird. It was like 3 months that she had to be here to help me. And she was such a champ. She really was such a champ. But she was coming down the hallway one day, and she was like, your dad was in the bedroom door. I was like, well, did you say hi? I mean,
yeah, right.
I mean, he's here because he's looking after me. So it's okay. And I wasn't scared. I mean,
good.
He was just so clear, So that was interesting, because she is gifted. She just doesn't, hadn't used that before. And I think also my caring spirits were here so strongly. I mean, I had to be in bed for 3 months. It was the worst. It sucked out loud. But, it was, well, I don't have to be anymore. So that's great. And it was so funny, because she was just like, there are so many people here. And I was like, well, there's three. So,
some can come in and out at will. I mean, one moment there's 10 people, one moment there's 3. I mean, it happens so quickly over there.
And I was so, because I had to be on pain medication and I was so high most of the time. And she was just like, did you see? And I'm like, right there. Yes, I did. Just say hi, and it was just so funny. But I think it's interesting when we have different levels of spirits around. And, but isn't it so, I feel like it's a gift when they let you interact with them. Sometimes I'm better at it than other times. Do you recognize who's around you when they are?
In most cases, yes.
If it's energy that's like family or somebody that you know? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I even have ones come to me that are not family or friends, but there's a familiarity, and they'll reveal who they are to me.
Yeah.
I had an experience some years ago with a guy I worked with, younger guy, and I get a call on a Saturday morning that he passed away the night before. So as I'm talking on the phone, all of a sudden I see out of the corner of my eye this enormous egg-shaped kind of ball of light kind of slowly moving its way towards me. And as it's coming closer, I'm starting to get, empathic responses. Like I'm starting to choke up. I'm like, uh-oh. And as I'm looking at this thing, it's not just the white light you would imagine. It was actually more of a baby blue. And at the bottom was sort of a really soft pink that went to like rose on the bottom. So it was an arc field that I was seeing with the different colors that I'd never experienced anything like that. So it comes closer and closer, and all of a sudden I just break down in tears, trying to talk to this person on the other end of the phone, and yet knowing that the emotions I was displaying were not mine. So I said to this energy, I said, can you please back off just a little bit? Let me finish the conversation, then I'll talk to you. And that's when it started to recede, and I realized that was the guy. And it didn't put it all together in that moment. I just realized as it starts to recede. So about 20 minutes, half hour later, I get off the phone and I walk into my room, which was adjacent to the room I was in. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of the room, here comes this ball of light again. Well, almost like, is it okay now? Can we talk now? Is it good? Like, yep, sure, come on in. So I stood there for about 20 minutes and talked to the corner of the room, but he was standing in front of me. He was very much in my mind's eye, although I could still detect that light that was there. I was seeing mostly him in the mind's eye. And what I saw was he had one foot in this little river of light. It was more of a stream. And the other foot was on the bank. And he says, I don't know what to do. I'm worried about my son, my family. I said, mate, what has transpired has transpired. It's now time for you to move forward and help the way you can from the side that you're on. This is okay. And I went through, the motions of, discussing that and why that was the case. And when I was done, giving him that logic, so to speak, I watched him put his other foot into that stream, and the entire scene just disappeared in front of my mind's eye. Like it just completely melted out of my thoughts. And as this happened, I swear the barometric pressure in the room completely shifted. And it was like nothing had happened. But I just had this incredible, overwhelming experience where I talked to this energy that was standing in front of me. So in those circumstances, I can identify, with a reasonable thought in mind who I'm talking to. But in many cases, they generally come to me, and that's sort of expected, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. That had to be so emotional.
It was incredible. I remember it like it was yesterday, and that happened 6 years ago, maybe 7 years.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know where to go with you next. This is such a fun conversation. But, I didn't realize when I reached out to you that you had such a vast array of different experiences within paranormal fields. And I really think that makes you such a fun person to talk to.
Well, thank you.
So thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for having me.
Well, I've got a feeling that I could probably have you several more times and never run out of things to talk about. That's a lot of fun. I mean,
if I had $1 for every time I heard that, I wouldn't work.
What else?
It's that's the beauty of this type of conversation.
Yes.
We don't have to stay streamlined on one specific thing, and even if we did, there are tendrils of detail to explore. All of the stuff in paranormal, esoteric worlds connects one way or another. And one place leads here, another place leads there, and you can always come back to a central point, but you can explore so much ground just because of the nature of what this is.
I know. And, people get so locked in, paranormal people, we're ghost hunters, or, I do cryptids, or, ufologists. Mm-hmm. And all of those worlds are so interconnected that sometimes I do know that some people do have things that they're better at or that they enjoy more. And I mean, I'm not a big into the woods to go find something that can eat me. That's not necessarily Bigfoot, right? Because you're in the woods at night. Around here anyway, we've got all kinds of things that can, rock your world right off the face of the planet. So, I'm not a big, go hunting person. I like being in a structure because usually it's me and another woman that are doing our investigations, and there's places that are not quite as safe as others. So you really need to make sure that you're safe with that. And I don't know, I like the UFO side, and I like your take on Montauk, because I've really never talked to anyone about that. And I appreciate you bringing that to the table. I was surprised that we started off with that, but it's so interesting to me. I've read about it my whole life. And
a lot of people know about it. Like, you've heard about it, you've read about it, but that's where it ends. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When I actually loved when, that Stephen King book, The Mist, when they're across from the test, and there's testing going on, and the character feels like that's where that came from, that they ruptured something in time. And, the book did. I don't know what the movie did. I didn't see it yet. I don't go to movies very much, not scary ones. But, and I didn't really want to see the supermarket scene. So I was like, I'm good. But, it just amazes me that they can make movies about that and people get all wigged out and stuff. But if you try to have a conversation with people about that, they're just like, no, that's not it. And it's like, that's such a strong possibility of what exactly happened.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's all intellectual. If you want to find out, just go down that rabbit hole a little bit, and you'll have enough to think about and come to your own personal intellectual deduction. In many cases, that's what we have to do. That's what we're offered. But strength in numbers in terms of knowing something happened. And when people put a focus on something like this, it grows in its intensity. And we've seen this with paranormal fields as well. I mean, somebody focuses on a house. Next thing you know, they realize this house is being haunted. Well, maybe there was some activity, but now that the entire world is now focused on the house, that activity ramps up significantly. So the same could be said about anything that we work with in terms of Black projects, because they don't just encompass the physical nature of things. They often go off into a completely different direction that is largely unexplored by the common person. And as long as we're stuck in limiting belief systems and modalities that don't actually serve us as what human beings are, we're always going to come into conflict with the progression of any sort of thought that goes into, different side worlds of esoterica. It's inherent, It
is. And I have had so much fun with this conversation. I don't even know what else I want to talk to you about, but I know that I'm going to have a list by the time we get off of here. So at some point, expect an email or,
that's fine.
Message, because, I would like for you to tell people how they can find you before we get too much farther along, because you're really everywhere and your interests are so broad that I think that anybody would be fortunate to be able to have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. You can certainly find me on Dark Hour Paranormal. That's exclusive to YouTube right now. People keep telling me to branch out with that. I'll get there. But right now, you can find me on YouTube. Again, Dark Hour Paranormal. I'm also occasionally on with ThirdPhase of Moon. I manage Dr. J Radio Live's channel. At one point, I was looking into being more active with Dark Matter Digital Network, which was the late Art Bell's production network. I think that's sort of waned in certain ways, but I still have friends who are active in the news section of that, so that's kind of cool. I'm always over at GoofOn. If you guys are familiar with that, if not, check them out. Yeah, I mean, really, Dark Hour is where you're going to find me most predominantly, but you will see me in many different areas, you know, going with the archaeology side of things that we're working on. I mean, there's so much in the works right now that we're just going to see iron out over this year, so keep your eyes open.
Well, I will. I'll keep my schedule open for when you have something that you want to come and tell us about that we didn't get to cover tonight.
That sounds good to me.
I'll reach out, and if you get something before you hear from me, let me know.
All right, certainly. Thank you so much.
Well,
yeah, absolutely, we'll do that.
Cool beans. Well, thank you for being here. I know that our listeners are probably just enjoying you to no end, and I appreciate your time.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I thank you so much for having me on. I always love sitting and having a conversation like this, especially with somebody who can carry it. And that's not always the case. And you did a fantastic job as a host, and that's all I could ever ask for as a guest anywhere.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that because sometimes I wonder.
You're doing just fine.
I think everybody does. I mean, I research an awful lot. I love all of these topics, and when I can, I get in the field. I ghost hunted in Scotland last year and the year before, and so I'm going to Ireland to do that in September. So my husband, the first time, I just told him after I paid for it because he was like, "You can't leave the country," and I was like, "But I can. I have a passport." So he was very wonderful about that. He didn't, get too irate for too long. But I just love going to see different places and, their UFO situations. I got to go to the Scottish UFO and Paranormal Conference and meet people there. That's why I went this year, ostensibly. But I just love getting to talk to people who have other experiences and ideas that open my mind. And you did that.
Well, I'm glad to be of service in that way. I think that's what we're all here doing. And again, I said it before, I'll say it again. We're all in this trip together. Nobody's more special, and there are no experts in the field. So if you ever hear anyone say, "I'm an expert,"
something to remember,
get lost.
Yes. And don't go in the woods with them.
Definitely don't go in the woods with them.
Don't go in the woods with them. Don't go in the woods with anybody you don't know. But okay, well, thank you again. I appreciate you so much. And
likewise, thank you.
For everyone listening, we will see you next week. Paranormal Experienced is going to be fun. I'm going to have Jenny Davis Wednesday night, and then we will be back next week, same cat time, same cat channel, with Costa Macreas. So be sure and tune in. Those are both going to be really fun shows. Thanks for listening. Good night.